Last Sunday, Israel fell into a constitutional crisis when, in an unprecedented move, Benjamin Netanyahu's government announced that it formally rejected and would disobey a ruling by Israel's highest court. The government's declaration related to a dispute over a media regulator, which at face value might not seem dramatic, but it taps into a much wider, long-running feud between Netanyahu and the Israeli judiciary. It sparked outcry in Israel and threatens to reignite simmering tensions in the polarised country. So in this video, we're going to explain this constitutional crisis, including the Israeli government's announcement, Netanyahu's long-running battle with the Israeli judiciary, and what it means for the country. Contrary to Trump's original talk of regime change, the war in Iran has apparently cemented the Iranian regime's grip on power. In the latest issue of our magazine, we explain how this happened, and why it's too early to be pessimistic about the future of Iran. That's just one of 80 pages in the magazine, because there's more in Too Long than you'd expect. Purchase your copy by clicking the link in the description. So let's begin by explaining the current legal battle that's at the centre of this controversy. To understand it, there are a few institutions and organisations that we need to explain first. The first of these is pretty self-explanatory, the Israeli Supreme Court, the country's highest court. Then there's Channel 13, an influential but loss-making commercial broadcaster that's run various critical investigations into Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And finally, there's the Second Authority for Television and Radio, Israel's commercial broadcast regulator. Now, Channel 13 has been the subject of competing bids this year. One of these was from telecom magnate Patrick Drahi, a French-Israeli billionaire who founded and owns the Netanyahu-aligned I-24 news network. Critics, such as the Union of Journalists in Israel, said that if Drahi took control of Channel 13, it would further erode press freedom and would fit into the Netanyahu government's, quote, master plan to capture the media. However, Drahi's bid for Channel 13 was edged out by a competing bid from a consortium of tech entrepreneurs led by Israeli billionaire Asaf Rappaport, who is an outspoken critic of Netanyahu's government, particularly of his contentious judicial reform. This now takes us back to the Second Authority for Television and Radio, which, as the regulator, would need to approve the Channel 13 sale to Rappaport and his co-investors. The Regulatory Council is still mostly made up of appointees of the previous anti-Netanyahu government. The council's term expired at the end of 2025, and Netanyahu's government tried to appoint a new set of members. But some of these appointments faced legal challenges over things like conflicts of interest. So the Supreme Court ordered that until it issued a ruling on said appointments, the previous council would remain in place. But in a subsequent twist, several members of the Second Authority Council resigned, taking its membership count to below the two-thirds threshold required for quorum under Israeli law. These resignations apparently came after pressure from Communications Minister Shlomo Karhi, with the government reportedly aiming at paralysing the activity of the outgoing council, including the approval of the Channel 13 sale and clearing the way for the new council appointed by the government. At this point, the Supreme Court intervened again, with a ruling in mid-June stating that the Regulatory Council could continue to operate, even without meeting quorum, given the exceptional circumstances. This naturally frustrated the Netanyahu government even more, and so, on Sunday, the government issued an extraordinary statement, which the cabinet unanimously endorsed, openly rejecting the Supreme Court's ruling, claiming that it contradicted the law. Karhi and Justice Minister Yariv Levin accused the court of being drunk with power, said the government would not recognise any decision, approval, appointment or action taken by the Second Authority Council while it remains in its current state. While it's probably the case that the government's declaration won't have much impact on the work of the regulator, it does not mean that this is not a significant move. According to the Times of Israel, this is the first time in Israeli history that a government has openly declared that it would not respect a ruling from the nation's highest court. A move that escalates Netanyahu's feud with the judiciary and plunges Israel into constitutional crisis, with a matter of months until the country goes to the polls for an election that will be make or break for Netanyahu's coalition. The move sparked instant outrage in Israel. Opposition leader Yair Lapid said the government had become criminal, while fellow opposition leader and Netanyahu rival Naftali Bennett said that disobeying a court ruling leads to anarchy in the streets and to the dismantling of our state. Similarly, Israeli President Isaac Herzog said that he would repeat it again and again that non-compliance with a court ruling is a red line that must not be crossed under any circumstances. These events form part of a wider and long-running battle between Netanyahu and the Israeli judiciary. Netanyahu's tense relationship with the judiciary is at least in part because of his long-running trial for corruption, allegations which he denies. After returning to office following the 2022 election, Netanyahu formed the furthest right government in Israeli history and pushed ahead with far-reaching reforms of the judiciary, which Netanyahu is accused of having a liberal bias, being undemocratic and prone to over-interfering. The proposed reforms, which would have weakened the power and independence of the Supreme Court, sparked regular mass protests within Israel through 2023. But the reforms were largely shelved in the aftermath of the October 7, 2023 attack and outbreak of Israel's war on Gaza. While the government has sought to revive some of the judicial overhaul proposals in recent months, this bombshell statement will surely further inflame the country's pre-existing polarisation and ramp up tensions between the government and the judiciary as the October election deadline approaches. In fact, there's a fear among Netanyahu's opponents that this move is an attempt to normalise disobedience of the court and could pave the way for the government to ignore increasingly important court rulings. Yair Golan, leader of the small centre-left Democrats, went as far as to say that the decision to ignore the High Court ruling is the operational order ahead of Election Day, thereby accusing Netanyahu's coalition of laying the groundwork for refusing to accept the election results. Israel is a deeply politically polarised country, and the past few years have seen a growing list of internal divisions that are pulling apart its social fabric. Over the military's multiple fronts of war, over the approach to bringing home the October 7th hostages, over military service exemptions for ultra-Orthodox Jewish Israelis, over the government's judicial reforms, and more. For the outside observer, the past couple of years have been dominated by narratives about Israel's security in relation to its external adversaries, which has driven its expansionist wars and action in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, and Syria. But these internal societal and political divisions are just as much of an important storyline. In fact, a recent Israeli Democracy Institute poll from May 2026 found that just 40% of Israelis were optimistic about the future of democratic rule, and an even weaker 21% were optimistic about social cohesion. Perhaps even more remarkably, a recent poll by the Jewish People Policy Institute suggests that more than their perceived threat of an Iranian nuclear bomb or the conflict with Palestinians, a majority, 55% of the Israeli public, see polarisation and internal conflict as the greatest threat to Israel's continued existence. This is an incredibly nuanced story though, with plenty of outlets reporting online, and even now we can see that there are 52 sources reporting on it. But how can we be sure that what we're reading isn't hugely biased? Well, that's a problem we face when making these videos too, and luckily that's where this week's sponsor, Ground News, comes in. For this story in particular, most of the sources reporting comes from the right. If we dig deeper into how the story is being framed, you can quickly see the contrast in how the story is being reported across the political spectrum. Some sources on the left emphasise the government defying the court, while right-leaning sources shift their attention to the constitutional crisis. We're only able to get this level of deep analysis and transparency in reporting because of Ground News, who we've been partnered with since 2023. Their incredible website and app collects thousands of articles, putting them all in one easy-to-access place to help expose outlets' political bias, how reliable their reporting practices are, and who owns them, with all of their information backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organisations. By now, you know how much we appreciate Ground News, and how we're such massive fans of all their features, but especially their blind spot feed. If you're not familiar though, this is where you can discover everything that's being disproportionately reported by one side or the other, whether it's a mile from your house or on the other side of the world. And that just scratches the surface of what Ground News has to offer. They're completely subscriber funded, so there's no corporate influence deciding what you see, and we partnered with them to get you the same 40% off unlimited access Vantage plan that we use. Get that by clicking the link in the description. Go to ground.news/TLDR or scan the QR code on screen, and you'll be supporting an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.